Homesteaders, Gardeners, and Cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today in the kitchen we are making chili crisp. And if you have not been part of this trend, chili crisp got super trendy probably about 5 years ago with this brand that I'll put on the screen. And it's an Asian condiment, and the reality is you can make it about 1,000 different ways. And I think I was originally inspired to try making my own from watching June on YouTube when she was doing the Budget Eat series for Food 52, I think it was. She no longer works for them, but she's a super creative cook, and she made chili crisp in her kitchen one day. And I was like, that's really not that complicated. I don't know why I've been so intimidated by that. Traditionally, if it's an Asian chili crisp, it will contain things like garlic and shallots or onions that have been crisped up, and then often Sichuan peppercorns and some star anise for a very distinct Asian note, sometimes peanuts, sometimes sesame seeds, and then lots of different kinds of chilies. The reality is you can leave that stuff out if you don't like it. I'm not a huge Sichuan peppercorn person, and so in this recipe that you're gonna see from me, I went ahead and left it out. But you can Google this and get lots and lots of ideas. I'm basically riffing on I think the original recipe from June and then the original recipe from Serious Eats. I'll leave links to both of those below. And then in terms of the chilies, it's usually made with dried chilies, and you can use whatever kind of mix you want. So you can go with stuff that's like really super hot, so like the traditional Japanese dried chilies or Thai dried chilies, or you can do stuff that's quite mild, so stuff like Guajillo or Ancho, or just regular, I've got red Anaheims that are dried as well, and those are kind of a medium heat. So you can make this as hot or as not hot as you want. Completely up to you. And so that's part of the fun of this, is just experiment, play around with things, keep good notes. If you are really into it, you can do things by weight so that you know how much you put in, and then you can change it up the next time you make it. You want to have a hot oil, so 350 to 375 degrees. When the oil goes over the chilies, it will bubble a lot because any residual moisture in those chilies is going to be released. And you want to make sure you've got a pot big enough that if it bubbles, it doesn't boil over. I wouldn't go any hotter than that with the oil, and then I take it immediately off the heat because I don't want those chilies to burn. And you'll see I have some garlic and onions in this that I crisped up ahead of time so that you get a nice crunch. You want zero moisture. So if you're using fresh things like fresh garlic and fresh onions, you want to make sure they are completely dried and crisped before you put it in a jar sitting on your counter, because if there's any moisture in there at all, you run the risk of things molding, because water and oil together equals bad things happening in terms of safety. So you want things to be completely dried out, but feel free to riff on this. There's a Mexican version of this called salsa macha, which is really the same idea but using Mexican peppers. And this particular variety that I made, it's mostly some chilies that I grew a couple of years ago that were a cross, and so they were saved seeds, and they were supposed to be Aleppo peppers, and they had clearly, based on the shape, they had crossed with some other chilies that I had out in the garden, most likely some Joe Parker Anaheim chilies, just based on the shape. And so I had a bunch of those, and so a lot of that went into this. But you want something that's got front of the mouth heat, a little bit of back of the mouth heat, a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of fruitiness. So mix up your peppers so that you get a really nice, even mix of flavors. Or if you are in love with one pepper, do the whole thing with one pepper. The idea of this recipe and this video is to give you permission to riff on what you like, rather than feeling like you're beholden to a recipe that you found online, because really the sky's the limit in terms of how you put this together. Chili crisp. Let's get started.
So I recruited my husband to help me with this because most likely he's the one who's going to eat the vast majority of it. And so we're taking off the stem and then knocking out the majority of the seeds, but not everything. A little seed in there isn't going to hurt anything. And then breaking those chilies up into about 1-inch pieces. I would recommend wearing gloves. He insisted he didn't need them, but normally gloves is a good idea with this, especially if you're dealing with really hot chilies. And then I'm going to grind this in a blender, and this is a Vitamix blender. And I've done this a lot because I have a small commercial kitchen where I grind peppers. And the trick to this is really low speed. So you don't want to pulverize everything. You're looking for chili flake. And in order to do that, you need to have a lower speed. And we put a few too many chilies in here. It was a little bit too much, so we kind of had to shake it up. And then pulsing it turned out to be the key in terms of getting this to break down evenly. And it was slightly more blended than I wanted it to be, but certainly acceptable for what we were doing for a home chili crisp. Alternatives to a blender would be a small spice grinder or a food processor on low. The trick is to know when to stop. So you don't want big chunks in there. And you can see it's kind of kicking up a big chunk when it hits it, but just enough to get it blended up.
Gorgeous.
I'm using avocado oil here. If you are not the kind of person who's going to eat this within a month or two, you're going to want to use an oil that has a long shelf life. I would not recommend coconut oil only because coconut oil is going to be solid at room temperature. And so avocado oil is a good choice. You could use olive oil, but I think it would lend a lot of flavor to this that you don't necessarily want. Peanut would be another good choice. Sesame is obvious, but sesame is going to be super, super strong. And so I wouldn't recommend sesame for the entire thing. To this, I'm adding 1 whole bulb of garlic that I sliced thin on a mandolin, and then about a 1/4 cup of shallot that I happen to have in my freezer. So I went ahead and used shallot instead of red onion, white onion, shallot. They all work. Our Walla Walla sweet onions are also in season right now, and a sweet onion would work and impart a little bit of a sweet flavor to this. And the key here, my temperature is not really going above 212 because there's a lot of moisture in those onions and a lot of moisture in that garlic. And so until that moisture is gone, that oil temperature is really not going to go past the boiling temperature of water. And this takes a while. And this is the kind of thing where it's very easy to get distracted, turn your back on it, and you end up with burnt stuff. So keep an eye on it, go slow, make sure that things aren't getting too done. Garlic can get really bitter if it's overcooked. But again, you want it to be crisp to the point where it snaps in your fingers when the garlic chips are cool. So you do not want any moisture left in there. I'm also adding to this about a 1/4 cup of peanuts because I like peanuts in this. Towards the end, I didn't want those peanuts to be cooking the entire time. You can't see the thermometer here, but my temperature is starting to creep up as I'm losing moisture. I'm stirring this regularly, but I'm also starting to check and see how crispy those garlic chips are. My original intention was to just add the chilies to this once everything was ready, but then I ended up with a phone call right as everything was just about done that I needed to take, and so I decided to go ahead and strain off the garlic and the shallots and then do the chilies and then add that back in just because I didn't want everything to get overcooked. Look at the bottom of the pan here and then look at it here. So this temperature is now up to about 375. I'm adding in the chilies and you can see how that's bubbling. So definitely our oil is way hotter than it was earlier. And I was aiming for a final amount of about a pint, and I overshot it a little bit by everything else that I added. So I had there probably 3/4 of a pint, so a 1.5 cups of actual chilies. And then to this, I added back in the garlic, the peanuts, the shallots. I added some sesame seeds. I added a little bit of powdered ginger, which I don't think you see in this video, and then a little bit of salt and a little bit of sugar. Add the sugar at the end. It's going to give a caramel note, and you definitely don't want to add that at the beginning or it's going to be way too done. You can see how dark this got. I was right on the edge of too hot here, but it really turned out great. So this was absolutely delicious. And at this point, no heat. So my heat is off. The chilies are done. They're nice and golden and darkened in color and beautifully smoky and delicious. And then I'm adding a little bit more oil because clearly I didn't have quite enough. I started out with a cup of oil and I probably ended up using about a 1.5 cups altogether. And then into our pint mason jar we go. This is cooled off a little bit. If you dump really hot oil into a mason jar, you run the risk of it breaking just from the temperature. And then I had a little bit of extra, so I probably ended up with about 3 cups instead of 2 cups. But you guys, this is so good. And because I used relatively mild chilies, like you can really put this on eggs or whatever you want, and it's not gonna just blow your head off, which is what I wanted. I didn't want this to be super hot. Some people really love it crazy hot, but I like just a lovely, well-rounded flavor. There you go, tribe. Chili crisp, Absolutely delicious. Give this recipe a try in your own kitchen. It's a great experiment if you're drying lots of summer peppers this year. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.